Testing, testing. Audio, audio. Gonna raise the level a little bit anyway. Every time. Let's do 28. Testing, testing, testing. Not so bad. Okay, going to... I'm not streaming live, am I? So... Looks like I'm streaming live. Okay, great. Can anybody hear me? Is this working? I'm putting out my link share too on Twitter. Okay. Can you guys hear what I'm saying? How's the audio on your end? Trying something different today. Let's see. Okay. If you guys can hear me, then we're almost ready to begin. Loud and clear. That's a really good sign. Okay. Boom. All right. Surprise. How you guys doing? I think we're live, and if the audio is synchronized, then we're in really good standing. Let me know about that. How about this? Did you hear that on the clip? Is the clap good? It's amazing that that's still a problem. I mean, that's such a Hollywood, it's an ancient Hollywood problem if I've ever heard of one. Let me just check comment link. Sweet, System Plus is there. That's not bad at all. Okay, so today's an interesting day. Happy Confederate Memorial Day. I know that you're all very happy about that. Some people don't like the Confederate Memorial Day, I've heard. But I want to explain why it makes a lot of sense on both sides. Let's say you hate it. Well, you don't want to forget it and repeat history. Let's say you love it. Well, you want to have the time to really study it so that you can know, what's really going on and get a bigger picture and be surprised by things. You don't want to love something if there's something you should, look deeper into, right? So Confederacy Day, pretty interesting. Let me pull up with the Stream Deck. Let me see if I got this. Is this working? No. Is this working? Which one's the button for this? Not quite there. Not quite there. I thought I got the thing working, but let's see. First off, this is display capture, and it should be to the Zoom meeting. No, that's set to the Zoom. That's why. It's set to Zoom. That was supposed to stay. Okay. Boom. We did it. Great. And now I can go to the Zoom meeting, to this and this and this. Hooray! Buttons. It's great. Happy Confederate Memorial Day to everyone who doesn't celebrate quitting America and taking up arms against the U.S. for your state's right to keep humans as livestock. Is the irony there not too palpable, I think? I mean, it's funny to say that right after saying... It's the same thing with saying, oh, now we have... my body, my choice, but not for the last 2 years, and it's this, I don't know, this is pretty crazy. They're like, we need to take all these people that live in these places and put them in some sort of re-education facility. So, yeah, that's not going nearly as well as it should go. There was a couple other people that were trying to argue against it, and it's kind of interesting if you start to look into the Confederacy because, look at this. A bunch of just like a lot of hate. Okay, America's like, look at this. Okay, now Do it in Brazil. Brazilian Confederacy. You know, and I know there's always going to be, they're going to look, hopefully it's, hopefully it's not going to be something dirty. If the internet is just like, I can't even believe what the internet does to me now. And every time I try to make a video. The Confederacy made its last stand in Brazil. After the Civil War, more than 10,000 Southerners left the United States rather than submit to Yankee rule. And this is the History Channel. I mean, do what you want with it. There's a lot of other articles as well, but you can Wikipedia this. There's a town in South America that is run by, you know, the grandchildren, great-great-great-grandchildren of Confederates. And Confederate President Jefferson Davis was in prison. For William H. Norris, a former Alabama state senator and state Confederate, it was all too much to bear. Rather than rejoin the United States, he and his son traveled to southeastern Brazil in late 1865 and purchased about 500 acres of rolling hills and reddish soil. That reminded, and then, oh, by the way, Snake here said something about the Iroquois Confederacy, and that's, we have to acknowledge the Native American Confederacy, and I feel kind of bad that I didn't start with that. That makes more sense, really. Native American Confederacy. I have videos on this, so those of you who watched my videos for years, you'll know that we've covered these things, but let me see if I can find it. Tecumseh's Confederacy, and there's a bunch of other examples. This is just, you know, the latest example that we have, but Tecumseh continued the tradition of confederating tribes across America. And you can go to Mexico, you can go to Peru, you'll find an example of confederated tribes. So confederated tribes is a thing not from a Hellenistic society. It comes from Native society. And Scythians as well did confederation. So there's more evidence of the connections between confederation than there is of imperial structure of society. That doesn't mean it's not imperial in a lot of ways, because eventually your tribe interacting with other tribes, it harmonizes the way tribes interact with each other. And so even though they are separate and different and autonomous, you know, a certain amount of trade does build an empire. So anyway, here's an example of the original confederacies of slave-owning Native Americans, and there's a lot of these different tribes, but Tecumseh stands out because in the 19th century, he was the final to go up to battle against the United States power, and was just slaughtered with guns in Tecumseh's War. And he'd predicted there'd be a black sun that was going to come, and then there was the Napoleon's Comet. There's a bunch of stuff. We have some episodes on that. I would rather, though, really quickly just go into Brazil. A bunch of people moved to Brazil, and now you've got a bunch of these. Is there pictures of them? I don't know. I'll have to skip forward. I'll go back to this. But if you look at Brazil today, there's a Confederate. Let me see here. There. Look, this is it. And they have this little federation, and it has Confederate flags everywhere. And, you know, like, some of these people are partially indigenous now or black. It's like, it doesn't really matter. Now, of course, there are tons of Europeans in Brazil. It's not that it is one way or the other. But there are certainly tons of people who are not. And the amount of people that are partially just mixed is increased. So it's pretty interesting, though, looking at the Confederate power. I mean, this is pretty interesting. Confederate Brazil, okay, and then they continue to have their celebrations. Brazil has a lot of slave population or former slave population that had been probably more than the United States would ever have had. I think 40% of all slaves. 40% of all people in the Western Hemisphere speak Portuguese of some form. And when you start to look into the interactions, it's not just Spanish speaking. Portuguese was a huge controlling interest in the slave trade. So it's not that they're unaware of the slave trade. It's not that they're pro-slave trade. In fact, you have to kind of get into it to realize that the Confederacy wasn't really that excited about the slave trade. It was kind of an exploitation placed upon them by the North, you know. But it's interesting because there really isn't just this one-sided argument about the Confederacy, and it's important to acknowledge the other one, or at least it's interesting to acknowledge the other side of the Confederacy, because it really is about suffrage, sovereignty, afraid of being without autonomy, without having your own autonomy in the state. And I mean, that's fantastic. Let me see if I can find, did I get this wrong again? I'm just terrible. Wait, no, that was it, right? that work? To stretch this window out or something so you can see it better? Yeah, there you go. Okay, so here's some of the Brazilian town people. Let me just zoom in on this. And this is in Brazil. Like, you can see some of these people are white still, but there are a lot of people that are not, that are part of the natives or part black or whatever. And they've assimilated, essentially. They just happen to have love for this idea that they were part of a sovereign state, and that now Brazil will allow them to continue having their own sovereign, quote unquote, sovereign state. And they're fun people to dance, and they're clearly not racist or anything. They're just chill people in Brazil. So if you feel like people are pretty rude to you in the United States, there's always Brazil. I think that's kind of an interesting little circumstance. Now, also, yeah, like the dresses and stuff, the Brazilian Confederate dresses, and yeah, like I said, like these are, yeah, and this is something else. Like the amount of people who were slave owners who were white is, not exclusive either. So the whole thing is much more convoluted than we originally realized. But that's not what I originally wanted to start with. What I wanted to start with today was about, well, actually, really quickly too, because we're going to do a little bit of news, just because that's what humans do. I'm just going to check on that. This might happen. We're not sure. It could be. Trump might have his Twitter turned back on. That's what people have been saying. I mean, that's what we've been saying. Hey, like, we'll believe it when we see it for a year or two now. And then but then very quickly, Elon started doing the things he said he was going to do, like taking over Twitter. So this is it. It could happen. He says he'll reverse the Trump ban. This could happen within the next day. So just expect that to be breaking news everywhere. I assume it's already known. I don't know how fast people are paying attention, but yeah, people kind of expected it. It could happen. It could not happen. It could literally just not be what you expect to happen. I don't know. I don't trust that it matters even, really, but it will probably affect and pivot society in lots of ways. So bring it up. Thought you should know. I'm gonna try to withdraw having like a huge opinion about that, and just tell you that I'm a little like remain stoic, remain a little skeptical. So there's also you were looking at the UFO stories about Roswell and opening a panel yesterday. I did a video with alien scientist Jeremy Reese. If you ever watch Alien Scientist channel, check it out. It's not everyone's cup of tea, because some people are interested in turtle Earth theory, and that's totally cool. But what I tried to do is bring a lot of the science community to a similar consensus where they're more aware of volcanoes and more aware of Tartaria, ancient technology. I mean, they're so interested in aliens. Can they be interested in ancient civilization? And they seem to be pretty open to it. There's a lot of skepticism in the scientific community, but I think they were pretty open to it, and it turned out pretty well. One of the things we were talking about was the AATIP. Everyone, I keep saying everyone, Vice magazine and mainstream lithium sources have said that there was this program called the AATIP back in 1999 to 2017, or there might have been something before the AATIP in 1999, I forget, but definitely through the 2000s into 2017 was the AATIP. Now there is no space program. No, of course. I mean, we have Space Force and everything else. There's a group called there's an agency, essentially, a program called the UAPTF. And so the UAPTF is, the unidentified aerial unmanned vehicle, or aerial phenomena, right? That is just in better even is phenomena. Do. So they're trying to downplay the fact that they've moved this up, but at the same time, UAPTF is, you're talking about, no, I've been trying to get a drone license, lazily practicing at my data so that I can get the drone. I have to just take the certification, I'll be fine. But at first it seemed like it was going to be complicated because there's a lot more to getting a pilot's license than you'd think. I mean, if a drone is a pilot's vehicle, even though you're not in the vehicle yourself, it's an unmanned vehicle. So to get your 107A it's complicated. And you have to understand about all these other vehicles that are in the sky, whether they be planes, experimental crafts, UAPs, unexplained aerial phenomena. I mean, that's interesting that they're starting to introduce it on such a wide scale. There's a couple other things I wanted to show you guys. Let me see if I can find it, which is like obviously Doctor Strange. Excuse me. Doctor Strange, the new movie, is going to be about the Illuminati. He's introducing the Illuminati as Doctor Strange gets to meet the Illuminati. And so it's interesting that there's all these movies right now, which this, like the Pentaveritat is having this good Illuminati. Doctor Strange meets the Illuminati. And then there was this teacher recently, was it like teacher arrested for secret society? I just saw this the other day. Florida man teacher. Yeah, is this it? I mean, San Antonio, a teacher who created a secret society to sleep with underage girls. Tracy High School having an inappropriate relationship with secret society. Karate teacher told boys were required to have sex acts for secret society. I'm starting to find out a bunch of these teachers trying to form youth groups for secret societies, right? I mean, that's kind of nuts. I mean, it's kind of what you have to expect. Like, there's going to be people that are trying to manipulate their way into power. Like, that's going to happen. But let me also show you this other one. Where's the Florida one? Let me see the Florida one I just found. Oh man, and I've got my, it's the one conflict is that the moderate safe searches, because you have to use safe searches when you search for this stuff. It's just crazy. Okay, Florida high school band director, counselor led cult-like secret society at school, police say. So this is the one that just came out recently. A band teacher and a school guidance counselor at Leesburg High School in Florida has been accused of operating a so-called secret society, according to a police report. The school counselor, Leonardo Finello, resigned last week. A spokesperson for the school told Fox 35 the Lake County School Board is scheduled to consider the band director Gabriel Fielder's employment. Criminal charges have not been filed against either person. According to the incident report filed in April 2022, former students told police that he had been part of the, quote, elder council in the high school, a so-called secret society. He described it as a cult-like group that was allegedly led by Fielder. Finello, the guidance counselor, was also a member, he said. In July 2021, the group reportedly disbanded. The school said that it had no affiliation with the group and that either apparent meeting occurred away from the campus, according to the spokesperson. The former student also told police that the guidance counselor once sent sexual text messages to him, blah, blah. So you get, it's very eyes wide shut, of course. We all know that there's going to be this, sexual thing. But yeah, I guess a lot of people are ready to get to the historical aspect. I can already see some comments there. They're already like, I don't really care about secret societies. They're not that secret, are they? Okay, well, let me just jump to the first part of this story then. So Alexamenos Graffito, also known as the Blasphemous Graffiti. This is important because it's the oldest picture we have of Christ, and he is pictured as a donkey. That would be kind of weird, but it's more weird when you consider Baphomet, right? Because Baphomet is a picture of the Antichrist. Get this. Pictured as a donkey. So there's an instantaneous connection right there between the original picture of Christ and the Templarian idea of Baphomet, which is connected to Aleister Crowley, and we can go into that, but who cares? Who cares? Honestly, who cares? We're not that excited about Satanism. It's only useful in recognizing that some of the story, and in defense of some of the early people burnt at the stake who the Satanists were maybe emulating or advocating for. I mean, imagine in the 60s, you saw the Munsters. You wanted to stand up for the Addams family that got burnt at the stake. And we just yesterday did a video where we talked about Guernsey. And in Guernsey, there were 3 women burnt at the stake because they were just across the aisle from France or England. And so they had turned into Calvinists or Cathars. I forget if they're Calvinists. I think they were Calvinists. And so they were burned at the stake because they weren't Catholic enough. Simple as that. And there was one's baby burnt. because they're the baby of a witch, right? Because she's a witch now because she believes in Calvinism. So Christianity killing its own because they weren't, do you believe in my God, my way? It's not that great. So eventually you have some Satanists who are like, well, I think that the thing you hated, mom and dad, is cool. And then they're going to end up becoming Satanists. Okay, so there's a huge amount of reactionaryism to modern Satanism. However, the idea that some people said in this period in time, I believe in this picture of Jesus. And this picture of Jesus is a donkey. I mean, granted, to be fair, this picture of Jesus, let me go back to it again in case you guys think I'm crazy. This picture of Jesus was done in Roman graffiti. It's not just that some guy said, oh, I love Jesus, the donkey head. There was a Roman who said, you know what the Christians worship? Those Christians, they worship a donkey guy. They're crazy. So there's that aspect of it as well. But, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because eventually echo chambers happen and people start to worship these things. The other aspect is that the Blasphemous Graffiti it has this lettering which is poor. It's poor grammar, and so some people think that there was more of a certain kind of code encoding into the grammar. I forget where it says it here. It's Greek for one thing, which is not Latin, and that's interesting. Beneath the cross is the caption written in crude Greek, and that might be because they're making fun of Greeks, right? Because they're saying the Christians are, but it could be understood as a variant spelling or possibly phonetic spelling. Get it? Phonetic of standard Greek sebetai, which means worship. So, in other words, Alexamenos worships his god, and they're saying Alexamenos loves this crazy donkey guy. And so, who was Alexamenos? Well, Alexamenos of Teos, and we remember that the R's are not pronounced in Persia, so that gives you kind of an idea of Ars or Taros or Tartaros. But Teos was one of the potential inventors of Greek literature genre of prose dialogue. So immediately you have to consider that, where does this come from? Does it come from Alexamenos? Did Alexamenos give it to us? Just making sure you can see that. By the three sources, Athenaeus of Necratis, Diogenes Laertius, and a papyrus from Oxyr Hinchus. So there's a lot to go into on Alexamenos of Teos, but essentially he was one of the first to become fascinated by the Christian cult, and that was a big part of it. I think that's why they make fun of him. But at the end of the day, also the calendar discrepancies. So it's interesting that even in the modern system, we have calendar discrepancies, that he would have been perhaps during the Buddhist period instead of during the Christian period. And someone had brought this up yesterday, this idea of is Jesus Muhammad or Buddha or whatever. And I tend to think that it is Manny Jesus. These are all people that you ascribe stories to, right? You're like, oh yeah, this guy is famous. How famous was he? Well, he was in a basket when they found him, and then he was raised in the temple. And we went through a couple examples of that. We're gonna do that a little bit more today because of Moses. So let's go to first. I'm just gonna actually, let me read you some stuff I wrote. How about that? Let me see here if this is got this right here. One second. Okay. So some of your daily vocabulary words for today. Tutmosis, Amun-hotep, which means, Amun is pleased, or, Hotepu, you can think is blessed. Osara Seth, or Osara Sip, Osara Seth, Osara Sop, or Sarsaf. These are all ways you could say Osara Seth. The name of a priest you'll learn about. And the criminal of Armana. Who could the criminal of Armana be? Okay. And you heard Tutmosis already, so you can think of Tutankhamun, and that could help you along your way with King Tut. Okay. Moses means in Hebrew, they say it means to be drawn up from the water, right? That's what it says in Exodus. But in Egyptian, in ancient Egyptian, in Kemetic, Moses means son of. So Amenhotep wanted to be known as Tutmosis because he was supposed to be the son of Tut or Tutankhamun, right? These little things like that start to hit up. And Amenhotep also had 4 names because Amenhotep was introduced a religion and was kicked out of Egypt for a while and came back, and so he was considered the criminal of Amarna, right? He was considered the criminal of Amarna because they didn't want to call him the pharaoh for the period of time. If you wiki him, you got like a period where he's like missing from governance. Now, even just with timeline discrepancies aside, not even looking at flamenco, the amount of generations between Joseph and Moses and the generations between Tutankhamun, Amenhotep, Akhenaten are, right, like we're talking 3 generations, but maybe 6 generations, because it could have been like a 70-year-old having a 20-year-old son, something that effect at a certain point. So you have a really interesting connection between these generations, and there's this story of Osara Seth. And so also I'm going to pull up Osara Seth. I'll just show you Osara Seth for a second. Osara Seth is a legendary figure of ancient Egypt who's been equated with Moses. His story was recounted by the Ptolemaic Egyptian historian Manetho, right? In Egyptiaca, first half of the 3rd century BC. Okay. So Manetho's work is lost, but the 1st century Jewish historian Josephus has quotes extensively from it. So this is how I was looking through this with Josephus. And everyone's been bringing up Josephus and saying, hey, Josephus didn't say this or did say that. Well, it's interesting what he did say about a lot of things and what we've inferred from that. And also the movie 10 Commandments and how it plays on some of these stories. So clearly, whoever wrote the 10 Commandments book were far a bit more Gnostic and esoteric than I ever considered. So high respects to you. The story depicts Osara Seth as a renegade Egyptian priest. Mind you, this is in Josephus' rendition of Manetho's Lost Egyptica. But again, Josephus is not so recent. It could very well be that it's written 1,000 years ago instead of 2,000 years ago, but that just proves our flamenco timeline. So the Egyptian priests who led an army of lepers and others, unclean people, across the desert against a pharaoh named Amenophis. Amenophis is connected to the 17th 100 BC, again with the 18th dynasty, right? So pharaohs of the 18th dynasty, Amenhotep 1, 2, and 3, and then 4 is Akhenaten. So again with the 4-generation thing that we are using. So much is debated in question, many committing sacrileges. He's told to have been in alliance with a group called the Hicks, who is told by Manetho and is equated with the Hebrews. And the Egyptians consider them committing great sacrileges against their gods because they believe in their singular God. Towards the end of the story, Osara Seth changes his name to, get this, son of, therefore, Moses. Okay? And there's a couple other ways you can spell that, and the Muslims have their own. So like Moses Islam. Let me jump onto that for just a quick second. So Moses in Islam, come on, wiki, bro, do it. Moses in Islam. I love how in Islam is its own page. It's a whole different Moses. Musa ibn Imran. So when you start looking in, Imran, son of Imran, and who is Musa, and what is muse? What does it mean to be the muse and the prophet? And these connections also to Akhenaten and Nefertiti, to Miriam. And so that's another one. Let's see. Miriam. This is terrible in the Bible. Yeah, Miriam in the Bible. No, Miriam in Islam, I think, is actually better. Yeah, I'm having a serious amount of negative magic against me. Musa ibn Imran, Moses of Imran, is important prophet and messenger of God, Allah, and frequently mentioned in individual in the Quran. His name being mentioned 136 times. Miriam, Islam, it should show up. Is it not there? Miriam, Bible. How about that? Okay, Miriam is essentially the sister of Moses. It kind of assumes, because the Bible says that she was the prophetess that appears in Exodus, and in the Talmud, there's in the Midrash a story where Moses leaves his wife, essentially stops having intimacy with Sephora, and they disapprove of the separation because they consider her outstandingly righteous, and because he starts making love with this Ethiopian girl who's dark-skinned. So what they end up doing is God tells them to leave Moses alone, and that they can do whatever they want, or something. Moses can do what he wants because he did what he had to do first. And God rebukes them, causing Miriam and Aaron to get a great burning sensation, and then they get a zararat, which is a kind of a leprosy, supposedly, but really it has to do with having white skin blotches. It seems like vitiligo. And so this is the introduction of, in a lot of the biblical narrative, this idea of vitiligo being a punishment for sin. Also, the difference between them, because they're not quite Ethiopian looking, and they're not, they're not white. So there's that starts to stand out as a balance point. Okay, I wanted to pull up my little rant here and just start going on it. So in Moses and okay, there's one more thing I want to show you, because the other thing is I want you to know I'm not just Moses and monotheism. Who else had this idea? Like, where did this idea come from? How old is this idea that Moses and introduction of Yahweh is Moses and monotheism? Okay, Sigmund Freud wrote a book called Moses and Monotheism, and it's in 1939. So the influences of 1939. This is an incredible synchronicity. This book tells the story of this idea of, Freud proposes that Moses had been a priest of Akhenaten. And this tends to be what I just found this out by researching it over the last few weeks, and eventually found it just fascinating that Freud had the exact same theory, because some people were saying that maybe Moses was Akhenaten, or maybe he was King Tut or something. And I was like, that's kind of much for me. Like the idea of Miriam being Nefertiti, and I've seen a few talks about it, and I'm not completely convinced. But because of the timeline, it makes sense that he could have been associated with the royal house. He could have been a priest, and that the story has been embellished, like Sargon. So basically you have, let me pull this again, a priest of Akhenaten who fled Egypt after the pharaoh's death and perpetuated monotheism throughout a different region. And then he was murdered by his followers, who then via reaction formation revered him and became irrevocably committed to the monotheistic ideas he represented. So the book consists of 3 essays and is an extension of Freud's work on psychoanalytic theory as a means of generating hypothesis about historical events, in combination with the obsessive fascination with Egyptological scholarship, archaeology, and antiquities. Freud hypothesized that Moses was not a Hebrew, but actually born into ancient Egyptian nobility, and was probably a follower of Akhenaten, the world's earliest recorded monotheist. The biblical account of Moses is reinterpreted by Freud in light of the new findings at Tel Amarna. So Tel Amarna is this spot here that was a compound with this phallic symbol for this obelisk, and the horizon of Aten. So Aten again is the sun god. We're talking about this idea that Aten became Ra, and Ra means evil in Hebrew, as well as meaning, the one true God to the Ravians in the 25th to 24th. But really, by the 18th century, there's a 20-year gap where they say, we only want you to worship Ra. Forget about the goddess. Forget about Hathor. Forget about everything else, and just focus on this one son, because it's not that the mother is birthing sons. It's that the son is the one true God, and everything else has to fall apart. Interestingly enough, connecting that to Hathor is this goddess here, but if you look at pictures of her, Hathor is often associated with a calf, maybe a golden calf would even be reasonable to say. And you start to see all these pictures of calves and the connections. As soon as you start to do that, you'll find pictures of the golden calf. Let me pull this up a little bigger. So here you go. Here's the big one. Yeah, there's your big calf right there. So jumping into the next one, reception, historian Kimberly. Well, hold on. Let me just. Now I feel comfortable. I can tell you some of this stuff. In Moses and Monotheism, Sigmund Freud asserted that the Moses of the Bible was not the Hebrew who was raised in an Egyptian palace, but an Egyptian priest who led a religious revolution to establish monotheism. This theory links Moses closely to the pharaoh Akhenaten. So what's it all about? Moses, circa 1400 BC, is considered one of the most important religious leaders in the world history. He is claimed by the religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and Baha'i as the important prophet of God and the founder of the monotheistic beliefs. The story of Moses is told in the biblical books of Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers, but he continues to be referenced throughout the Bible. The prophet most often cited in the New Testament is the Quran, he's the most cited prophet in the Quran. He also plays an important role, and again, he's the most often cited religious figure who's mentioned 115 times in the Quran, as opposed to Muhammad, who is only mentioned by name 4 times in the Quran. As in the Bible and in the Quran, Moses is a figure who ultimately stands for the divine or human understanding. Moses is best known from the story of the biblical book of Exodus and the Quran as the lawgiver who meets God face to face on Mount Sinai to receive the 10 Commandments after leading his people out of the bondage of Egypt and to the promised land of Canaan. The story of the Hebrew Exodus from the Egypt is only found in the Pentateuch and the first 5 books of the Bible and in the Quran, which were written later. No other ancient sources corroborate the story, and no archaeological evidence yet supports it. This has led many scholars to conclude that Moses was a legendary figure in the Exodus story, a cultural myth, but the Egyptian historians Manetho in the 3rd century tell us a different story, a story of an Egyptian priest named Osara Seth, who led a group of lepers in rebellion against the wishes of a king who wanted them banished. Osara Seth, or Asarsoth, as Manetho claims, rejected the polytheism of Egyptian religion in favor of a monotheistic understanding and changed his name to Moses, meaning child of, in Egyptian, and usually used in conjunction with God's name. So Ramses would have been Ra-Moses, son of Ra, Ramses. For example, Osara Seth would have attached no god's name to his own, so he believed his name should have simply been Moses, or Ichai Moses, Ichai. I am Moses, I am. I am son of I am, right? I am the son of I am. Manetho's story of Osara Seth of Moses is relayed by the historian Flavius Josephus, circa 37 to 100 through 117 CE. It's the first time in history I've ever accidentally done that. Anno Domini tells a similar story of a man named Moses who became the leader of the colony of Egyptian lepers. This has led a number of writers and scholars, including Joseph Campbell and even Sigmund Freud amongst them, to assert that the Moses of the Bible was not a Hebrew who was raised in an Egyptian palace, but an Egyptian priest who led an Egyptian religious revolution to establish monotheism amongst a quarter of the population. Not only the Hebrews, but a number of other tribes who would have escaped as well. This theory links Moses closely with the pharaoh Akhenaten in 1353 to 1336 BC, who established his own monotheistic belief in the god Aten-Ra. Unlike any other god and more powerful than all, in the 5th year of his reign, Akhenaten's monotheism may have been born of genuine religious impulse, or could have been a reaction against the priests of the god Amun, who had grown almost as wealthy and powerful as the throne. In establishing monotheism and banishing all the old gods of Egypt, Akhenaten effectively eliminated any threat to the crown from the priesthood. The theory advanced by Campbell and others follows Sigmund Freud's Moses Monotheism book, is that Moses was Osara Seth, a priest of Akhenaten, who led the like-minded followers out of Egypt after Akhenaten's death, when his son Tutankhamun, circa 1336 to 1327 non-Fomenko BC, restored the old gods and practices. Still, scholars equate Moses with Akhenaten himself and see Exodus story as a mythological rendering of Akhenaten's honest attempt at a religious reform. Moses is mentioned by a number of classical writers, all drawing on stories known in the Bible or by earlier writers. He could have been a mythological character who took on a life of his own as his story was told over and over. Or he could have been a real person to whom magical or supernatural events were ascribed, or could have precisely happened as depicted in the early books of the Bible and the Quran. Who's to say? Dating Moses' life and the precise dates of Exodus is difficult and is always based on interpretations of religious books and the books of Exodus in conjunction with other books of the Bible, and it's always speculative. It's entirely possible that the Exodus story was written by a Hebrew scribe living in Canaan who wished to make a clear distinction between his people and the older settlements of the Amorites in the region. The story of God's chosen people led his servant Moses to a land their God had promised them and would have served the purpose well. Moses in the Bible, the book of Exodus, written in 600 BC, some odd, picks up from the narrative in the book of Genesis. Genesis talks about this, ending with this Joseph and the son of Jacob. Joseph has the Technicolor Dreamcoat, who was sold into slavery by his jealous half-brothers and rose to prominence in Egypt. Joseph was adept at understanding dreams and interpreted the king's dreams, and indeed was considered by the Egyptians a great magician. A sorcerer. Acutely predicting a coming famine, he was placed in charge of preparing Egypt for the famine. Joseph succeeded brilliantly and brought his family to Egypt after an interesting little drama. And the Exodus book opens with the Hebrew descendants of Joseph becoming numerous in the land of Egypt. Okay, so the Pharaoh, fearing they might seize power, enslaves them. Okay, so this idea that Joseph comes to Egypt, takes over the place, is in charge for 100 years, gets enslaved, and all of his people, because he's got huge amounts of wives and slaves and family, and his family extended have family. So all of a sudden they're surmounting in 50,000 people or something to that effect. And this is 100 years, right? Then you have the story of the Hyksos. The Hyksos story. Let me go to the Hyksos really quickly so people know what I'm talking about. So Hyksos is a term, rulers of foreign lands, Egyptian pronunciation Hekau Kasut, Hyksos, a term for which modern Egyptology designates the kings of the 15th dynasty of Egypt. The seat of power of these kings was of Avaris and Nile Delta. So this is 200 years, according to this, separate from the 1850, right, BC. So either the calendars that we have are not quite perfect, or Fomenko's completely right, and we now understand that beyond the Armageddon period of the reset, there's a 200-year discrepancy in some of these Hellenistic and Egyptian dynasties, and we're going to have to use dynasties as a way of metricing, because a dynasty is a lineage of kings, and if the kings have the same birthdays and death days in a row, then we're able to connect this concept. So there's a little bit of crossover, you have to admit. Anyway, could the Hyksos be the Hebrews? Is there a part here somewhere? There you go. In the Monotheism Josephus tradition, Josephus and most of the writers of antiquity associated the Hyksos with the Jews. Quoting from Manetho's Egyptica, Joseph states that when the Hyksos were expelled from Egypt, they founded Jerusalem. It is unclear if this is the original to Manetho or Josephus' own addition. Manetho does not mention Jews or Hebrews in his preserved accounts of the expulsion. Josephus' accounts of Manetho connects the expulsion of the Hyksos to another event 200 years later, in which a group of lepers led by the priest Osara Seth were expelled from Egypt to the abandoning of Avaris. There they ally with the Hyksos and rule over Egypt for 13 years before being driven out, during which time they oppress the Egyptians and destroy their temples. After the expulsion, Osara Seth changes his name to Moses. Asimon argues the second account is largely a mixture of experiences of the later Amarna period with the Hyksos invasion. Osara Seth still likely standing in for Akhenaten. The final mention of Osara Seth, in which he changes his name to Moses, may be an interpolation. Second account is sometimes not held to be held by written Manetho at all. So Some people, you heard like 6 excuses in there, but you get the point. Josephus tells us in our stories, and remember, we're using Josephus as our main historical proof of the Hebrews in Egypt. So, yeah, he's talking about a group called the Hyksos. It's not a confusion. And the evidence here that there's generations between, I've just shown you, between Moses and Joseph is about 120, maybe 200 years. So if that's the case, yeah, I mean, this is not that confusing. You've got Joseph shows up, the Egyptians are taken over by the Hyksos. They rule for 100 years, maybe 13 years. They're really in charge. Like everyone's lost. There's nothing else but the Hyksos rule. But for 100 years, because according to the Joseph story, he maneuvered himself into an administration position. He was not the Pharaoh. He was above the Pharaoh in the sense that the Pharaoh was tired, lazy, and was out all day. But he was, the Pharaoh technically was Pharaoh still, was still God on earth. He was not God on earth. And so when Joseph's Hyksos people essentially took that position, then began their superstitions that they could not be God on earth. They have to just hold on to this spirit in the desert associated with angels that are these supernatural beasts of burden. Okay, so let me just jump to my, this is here. Great. I'm getting good at this, I swear. The famine succeeded brilliantly. Okay, Moses, Joseph, numerous. Okay, so the Pharaoh enslaved Joseph's families. Pharaoh's still worried about the growing population of Israelites, decrees that every male child must be killed. There's also in Josephus this idea of one of the priests, or several of the priests, predict that there's going to be a baby born that's going to lead their people. And there's beliefs within the Israelites that the child will be born in this month, and I forget which month that is. So, oh yeah, is Yost here? Hey Yost, check this out. Isn't that neat? Isn't that cool? Yeah, thank you for that. Compliments of people who help me make things happen. I appreciate that. Okay, so every child must be killed of the month. Moses' mother hides him for 3 months, but then, afraid he would be discovered anyway, kills him, sets him adrift in a papyrus basket on the Nile, where he floats down to where the Pharaoh's daughter are attending, and her attendants are bathing. The child is taken from the river by the princess, who calls him Moses, claiming she chose the name because she drew him out of the water. References Exodus chapter 2, verse 10, which is making the assertion that Moses means to draw out. But this etymology of the name has been contested since, as noted, Moses is Egyptian for child of. So Moses grows up in the Egyptian palace until one day he sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave and kills him, burying his body. And in the movie, it's played by Vincent Price. It's really worth watching. He buries his body in the sand. The next day, when he is out again amongst the people, he sees 2 Hebrews fighting and pulls them apart, asking what the problem is. One of the Hebrews answers if he's going to kill him the way he had killed that Egyptian. Moses then realizes his crime has become known, and he flees Egypt. For Midian. In the land of Midian, he rescues the daughter of a high priest named Reuel, and in Exodus 2, and then later, Jethro afterwards. Jethro is the Ishmaelite who has the daughter Sephora, who becomes Moses' wife. Moses then lives with his wife Sephora in Midian as a shepherd until one day with the Ishmaelites, with his green cloak, until one day when what happened? Almost there. Okay, until one day the bushfire, there it is. He encounters the bushfire. The fire is the angel of God, not Yahweh himself. And the angel in the bushfire brings Moses a message that says he should return to Egypt to free God's people. Moses is not interested and bluntly tells God to please send somebody else. See Exodus 4:13. God is in no mood to be questioned on his choices, allegedly, and makes it clear that Moses will be returning to Egypt. He assures him that with all it will be well, but he also says this whole thing about hardening his heart. He will have his brother Aaron to help him speak, because I think the other thing that they don't say, but I think Josephus says, is that Osara Seth had his tongue cut out. So they associate that Moses was Osara Seth. He might have had his tongue cut out and not been able to speak directly and needed Aaron, as well as supernatural powers which would enable him to convince the Pharaoh that he does indeed speak for God. He also tells Moses in a passage which has long troubled interpreters of the book that he will, quote, harden Pharaoh's heart against receiving the message and letting people go at the same time. He wants Pharaoh to accept the message and release his people, but he's going to make it more difficult for Pharaoh to do that by hardening his heart against them. Either way, Moses returns to Egypt as God has promised. Pharaoh's heart is hardened against him, and he won't let his people go. Moses and Aaron compete with the Egyptian priests in an effort to show whose God is greater. And this is interesting because the idea that Moses' brother is, Ra Moses, right, is interesting. This idea that the son of Ramesses, and this is not in the Bible. They don't name the Pharaoh in the Bible, but they do in Josephus refer to Nefertiti. And so Nefertiti's connection to Akhenaten is, and also to Ramesses is interesting. Although there is it's like 200 years later is there's another Pharaoh Ramesses who's married to Nefertiti. So there are some crossovers there, but again with the flamenco timeline, it could just be that the writers of the Ten Commandments movie are just that much more aware of flamenco than we ever really realized. So I'm not sure. But so Pharaoh has this connection to Moses because of their growing up together, and they're both educated. They're raised by the Egyptian royal family, but that doesn't mean that the family's raising them. That means that the royal Egyptian priests are raising them, right? I mean, if you're rich, you're gonna have the priests are gonna be your teachers. So Moses and Ra Moses are taught to practice magic, essentially, and by the Egyptian priests. And maybe Ra Moses is not as good as it. We're not sure, but we know that Moses and Osara Seth were fantastic at it. And that Nefertiti, the wife of Akhenaten, and perhaps sister, which could connect Miriam and Moses, that they were magicians, that she was considered a prophetess, that the magic was something that was considered. So this idea that they were being raised around priests is important. And then Ra Moses gives the staff to Moses when he leaves, when he's abandoned, he's kicked out. And so when he takes his staff and he returns to Egypt, he's using the Egyptian magic staff to practice his Egyptian magic. So it's kind of interesting that that's the first thing he does is he pulls out the staff that he's been given by Ra Moses from the Amun-Aten temples. And he uses that staff to show that his one true God is better at doing the Egyptian magic than their other god. So it says God is in no mood to be questioned. Let me see, Pharaoh's heart. Let's see. Where is that part there? Okay, so they compete with the Egyptian priests to see who is better, but Pharaoh is unimpressed, and after a series of 10 plagues, destroys the land, finally killing the firstborn children of all the Egyptians. The Hebrews are then allowed finally to leave, as God has directed, and they take vast amounts of treasure out of the Egypt with them. Pharaoh changes his mind after they've gone, however, and sends his army of chariots in pursuit. In one of the most notable passages from the Bible, the Red Sea is parted by Moses so they can get across. The Egyptian army chasing them are drowned when the water collapses. So, I mean, and again, looking at some of the hicks versions of this story, there's a number of examples where the hicks were in an exodus, they were condemned, they had to escape, they fled at night, they crossed seas perhaps. There's like moving on the capital of the Delta, built in the Ramesses on the site of Avaris, where he set up the stela marking on the 400th anniversary of the cult of Set. Set being associated with the foreigner's god. There's just so many things here to connect the Egyptians' takeover by this group, the Hyksos, that lasted for a generation or 6 generations, a century rather. And the the amount of slaves also that were taken in this period is incredible. Like the slavery that was built up. So it's completely plausible that a lot of the infrastructure of Egypt, the way it was created, comes from the Hyksos invasion and the Hyksos control of Egypt. The other thing is this idea of the Hyksos invasion connecting some of the later stories in the Bible, but I can't corroborate for sure. But just looking at some of these ideas of Joseph and the wall of Joseph. So, and looking at some of the art of the Hyksos, it's kind of fascinating to see. Like, for instance, horses come from Asia. So the idea that the horse was probably introduced to Egypt by the Hyksos. So this idea of the Semitic Indo-Asian trade network and what was created. I mean, they didn't have horses before they showed up. So that's pretty interesting to think about. There's some more stuff I wanted to cover here. Moses received the law as well as the instructions for how to build the Ark of the Covenant. He leads his people down. Oh, let's get up here a bit. So at Mount Sinai, Moses leaves his people to ascend and meets God face to face. He receives the 10 Commandments, but not the ones we know, God's law for his people on the mountain. But Moses receives the law as well as the instructions for the Ark and the Covenant and the tabernacle, which will house God's presence. Among the people down below, his followers have begun to fear him dead, and feeling hopeless, ask Aaron to make them an idol that they can worship. They ask Aaron to melt down their treasures. And they took the Egyptian that they took from Egypt into a fire, and they created a golden calf on the mountain. God sees what the Hebrews are doing and tells Moses to return and deal with his people. And when Moses comes down the mountain and sees people worshiping the idol, he becomes enraged and destroys the tablets of the 10 Commandments. He tells all who remain faithful to God to come to his side, including his brother Aaron, and then commands that they kill their neighbors on the other side of the line. And the friends and brothers all are forced, and they kill everyone who forced Aaron to make the idol for them. Exodus chapter 32, verses 27-28 describes the scene and claims about 3,000 people were killed by Moses' Levites. Afterward, God tells Moses he will not accompany the people anymore because they are stiff-necked people, and should he travel further with them, he would pick wind up, killing them out of frustration. Moses and the elders then enter into a covenant with God by which he will be their only God and they will be his chosen people. And he will travel with them personally as a divine presence to direct and comfort them. God writes in the 10 Commandments on new tablets, which Moses cuts for him, and these are placed in the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark is housed in the tabernacle, which is an elaborate tent. God next commands that a lampstand of pure gold be made and a table of acacia wood. By the way, if you're looking for a gift, an acacia wood nightstand, not bad. There's a place for his presence in the tabernacle for receiving offerings, and he further specifies a courtyard to be created for the tabernacle and outlines acceptable offerings and various sins that one must avoid and one must atone for. No longer will the people have to question his existence or wonder what he wants, because the 10 Commandments and other instructions are very clear, and further they will know he's amongst them in the tabernacle, even with the gold in their midst, even with God in their midst. However, the people still doubt and still fear and still question, and so it is decreed that for this generation they will have to wander in the desert until they die. The next generation will be one that sees the promised land, and Moses then leads his people through the desert for 40 years until he is accomplished, this is accomplished, and the younger generation reaches the promised land of Canaan, and Moses himself, get this, cannot be allowed to enter and can only look upon it, across it, from the river of Jordan. He dies and is buried in an unmarked grave on Mount Nebu, and leadership is assumed by his second in command, Joseph, the son of Nun. So Moses' trials and challenges mediating between his people and God's, as well as his laws, are given in the book of Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy, which, taken with Genesis and Exodus, make up the first 5 books of the Bible. Traditionally, they are ascribed to Moses himself as the author's hero's story. Biblical scholarship, however, discounts Moses' authorship and maintains that the first 5 books were written by several different scribes at different times, different periods. The story of Moses is related in Exodus and the hero's story, as elaborated by Joseph Campbell in works such as The Hero with 1,000 Faces or Transformations of Myth Through Time. Although Moses is born a Hebrew, he is separated from his people shortly after birth and denied his cultural heritage. Upon discovering who he is, he must leave the life of comfort he has grown to know and embarks upon a hero's journey, which leads him to recognition of his purpose in life. He's afraid to accept it, but he knows he must do it anyway and succeeds. The Exodus story resonates as it touches very universal themes in adventure storytelling in the hero's epic and symbolizes regarding the personal identity, purpose in life, and involvement of the divine in human affairs. Moses' entry into the story purposefully employs the motif of the infant born of humble parents who become, or who he becomes, or his unknowingly is a priest, but by the time Exodus was written, the backstory of Moses had been known in both the Middle East and the Near East for almost 2,000 years through the legend of Sargon of Akkad. And so let's just jump into Sargon really quickly and just show you a little Sargon picture. Hold on. I think there's another Sargon on the internet. I think you guys have heard of the other one. So let's talk about this guy. Not to be confused with Xerxes. Sargon of Akkad, also known as Sargon the Great, was the first ruler of the Akkadian Empire, known for his conquest of Sumerian city-states in the 24th to the 23rd century BC. He is sometimes identified as the first person in recorded history to rule over an empire. Sargonic, or Old Akkadian dynasty, which ruled a century after his death until the Gutian conquest of Sumer. Let's save that for another day. So, but if you start to look into the stories, I forget if it was the other day we talked about the Moses motif of the baskets revealed in a Mahdi Islamic character. That story was also revealed originally. The oldest one we've got of a dude raised in a basket seems to be Akkad. Let me see if I can find the basket. There you go. Birth legend. Here's the picture of this woman finding a baby in a basket. Is this somewhere? I don't know if they even... It's a thing. Trust me. It's a thing. So, let me just read you a bit of that. Sargon 2334 to 2279 BC, non-Fomenko, was the founder of the Akkadian Empire and the first multinational empire in the world. His famous legend, which he made, well, I don't know if it's the first, but again, you know, it's important. He's definitely associated with the errata. He made great use of in his lifetime the multinational empire to achieve his aims relating to how his mother was a priestess who quoted, who quote, set him out of a basket. Oh, here's the quote I wanted to get, right? Dang. Let me get that basket thing. My mother was a high priestess. My father I knew not. The brother of my mother loved the hills. My city is Azupiranu, which is situated on the banks of the Euphrates. My high priestess mother conceived me. In secret she bore me. She set me in a basket of rushes, which with bitumen she sealed my lid. She cast me into the river, which rose over me. The river bore me up and carried me to Aki, the drawer of water. Aki, the drawer of water, took me as his own son and reared me. Aki, the drawer of water, appointed me as his gardener. While I was his gardener, Ishtar granted me her love. And for 4 and some odd years, I exercised kingship. Okay, so then further it goes. Yeah, set me in a basket, rushes, and sealed my lid with bitumen. She cast me into the river, which rose over me. And the river bore me and carried me to the Aki, to the drawer of water. So Sargon grows up to overthrow the king and then unites the region of Mesopotamia under his own rule. Scholars Paul Krozovic writes that Sargon's story mentions the International Babylonian Festival of 1990, where Saddam Hussein celebrated his birthday, 1990 AD. Krozovic writes that the festival came to a climax. Hey, Ping Trip. Bro, I love you, bro. Hey, just everybody take a second to say that they love Ping Trip. I love that money. That's great. But also, do you watch enough Ping Trip? Because Ping Trip's like the best channel on YouTube. I thought I was pretty good, but he does things that just will make you feel good inside. Or kind of awkward and uncomfortable, really. Anyway, Mesopotamia under his rule. 1990, they were like, this is crazy. Saddam Hussein, where did it go? Saddam Hussein celebrated his birthday. He mentions the Sargon story. Crowds dressed in ancient Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian costumes are paraded around Saddam Hussein, and they open the doors to reveal a palm tree, which 53 white doves flew out of the sky. Beneath them, a baby Saddam, pictured, posed in a basket, came flowing down a marsh bordering the stream. Time magazine's reporters were particularly struck by the baby in the basket theme, erroneously describing it as Moses. But why on earth would Saddam Hussein wish to compare himself to the leader of the Israelites? The journalist was missing the point. The motif was not of Moses, but of a Mesopotamian invention, long before the story of Moses had been applied to Moses. Adapted. The Iraqi dictator was alluding to a much more ancient and far, far older, more glorious precedent. He was associating himself with Sargon. The writer of Exodus also wanted his hero to be associated with Sargon, and a true hero would rise from inauspicious beginnings to achieve greatness. Those who believe the Exodus story as a cultural myth point to Moses' beginnings along with many other facets of the story to prove their claim. Scholars such as Roslai David and Susan Weisbauer accept that Exodus story as authentic and ascribed to Sargon. I think that's kind of an interesting thing. Just what do you guys think about that? You've got this ancient story of Sargon who is not that different from Moses, except that he ends up getting to keep his empire. Meanwhile, you have this Akhenaten figure who's been allowed to keep his empire. I mean, he loses it for 20 years. He's called the Criminal of Amarna, but then his royal group are able to take power again. So I wonder what you think about that. That's kind of where I'm at with that. Well, we're about an hour in, and I think that's pretty much all the time we have for today. So we're going to have to go into the Moses stuff more tomorrow. I hope that we can get... Ian was going to join us, but I think that he might have got a time thing mixed. Let me see. Yeah, so we're going to do Ian tomorrow, the next day, or whenever, the day after. But I'm glad you're here. And Ping Trip, can't wait to see you. I think we're going to plan something for the next week or two. Probably 2 or 3, because we're all pretty busy. But love you, bro. Take care. Oh, let me push my cool button.